We began this new worship series on Daniel last week. Daniel is a legendary character, a faithful person who lives in this hostile culture and faces challenges there, especially as a faithful person who worships the Lord our God. Now, last week we heard about Daniel, his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they came to serve in the king's court. They were, they were part of that whole thing in Jerusalem where they were conquered by the Babylonians, and they were taken into exile, forced to serve in the Babylonian court of King Nebuchadnezzar. It was going very well, but now there's some trouble. Hear these words. In the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed such a dream that his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. So the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had such a dream that my spirit is troubled by the desire to understand it." The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will reveal the interpretation." The king answered the Chaldeans, "This is a public decree. If you do not tell me both the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you do tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore tell me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time, "Let the king first tell his servants the dream, then we can give its interpretation." The king answered, "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time because you see I have firmly decreed, if you do not tell me the dream, there is but one verdict for you. You have agreed to speak lying and misleading words to me until things take a turn. Therefore, tell me the dream and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can reveal what the king demands. In fact, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter of Chaldean. The thing that the king is asking is too difficult, and no one can reveal it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with mortals." Because of this, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. The decree was issued, and the wise men were about to be executed, and they looked for Daniel and his companions to execute them. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So what if I told you, I can tell you right now what you are thinking? What if I told you that? I can tell what you are thinking. Well, right now you're thinking, no, you can't, except for maybe one of y'all out there, and you're like, oh no, right? No. Of course, the reality is, I can't tell what's going on inside of your head. You can't know what's going on inside of my head. No human can tell exactly what's going on inside another person's head, right? Well, the emperor couldn't sleep. He was troubled. Not by the thousands of people he had forcibly displaced, or the thousands he had massacred on the battlefield, or the wealth that he had pillaged from the surrounding nations. He was troubled by his dreams. Although, maybe that's a way of saying he was troubled by all these other sorts of issues. So, Nebuchadnezzar, he summoned the dream interpreters, the enchanters, the diviners, the professional prognosticators to explain his dreams. And the king said, "If you can't tell me the dream that I had and what it means, then I'm going to have you killed, and your homes and your families will be turned into ruins." Yikes! They said, "What? You want us to tell you the dream that you had and then tell you what it means? How are we supposed to do that? We don't know the dream that you had. Nobody can do that. Just tell us the dream that you had, then we'll tell you what it means." And Nebuchadnezzar exploded into this rage, and he ordered that all of Babylon's supposed sages should be executed. Now, of course, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were serving in the king's court, and they were facing this danger then as well. So they were hunted down too in order to be put to death. Arioch was the chief executioner, and so he went out in order to execute all of the sages. And when he got to Daniel, Daniel didn't even know what was going on or what this urgency was all about. Daniel had to figure out the reason for the death sentence, why it was so urgent, why it was so unreasonable. And after he heard the story from Arioch, then Daniel went in and he asked the king for some time. He assured the king he could explain the dream's meaning. Now, this was a pretty bold move, and after all, the king had already accused the professional prognosticators of Babylon that they were stalling for time. And here Daniel says, just give us some time. I'll be sure to help you, but give us some time. And then Daniel gathered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he explained the situation to them, his three friends. And the first thing they did, the very, very, very first thing they did was they turned to God in prayer. They asked God to help them. They didn't arm themselves. They didn't try and overthrow the king. They didn't hide. They didn't run away. They turned to the Lord our God for help. And they may have even fasted while they turned to God. We heard last week how they determined that they would depend upon the Lord and not upon the king or any earthly power. They would depend upon God. And that's really why Daniel asked for some time, so they could call upon the Lord. Now, they hoped that they wouldn't die. They hoped that the rest of Babylon's sages wouldn't be killed either. But the very first thing that they did in the midst of that hope was turn to God in prayer. And then, in a night vision, the mystery was revealed to Daniel. And the first thing that Daniel did was to immediately give thanks to God. He said, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are His. God is the one who uncovers what lies deeply hidden. God knows what hides in the darkness. The light dwells with God." And then Daniel goes on to praise God as the only one who has the power to change the times and the seasons, to dethrone one king, only to establish another. And I think this is a really important point for us. God knows what hides in the darkness. God knows all things. He gives illumination in times of deep confusion and fear. And I think the reality is we all have, or if somehow we haven't, we will, but we all experience moments or seasons of darkness in our lives when we are confused, when we are afraid, when we don't know what's going on. And where do you turn for help? Where do you turn for mercy? Is there any living person, any human being who can rescue you from the impossible difficulties you experience? God alone has the power to change the times and the seasons of our lives. God alone is the one who can bring light into the darkness that we experience. Then Daniel went to Arioch, the man appointed to kill all the sages, and he's like, "Don't kill anyone, wait! Take me to the king and I will explain the dream's meaning to him." And immediately Arioch took Daniel right to the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said, "Is this really true? Are you really able to do this? Can you tell me the dream and its meaning?" And now Daniel had this amazing opportunity. He had the opportunity to bear witness to God, to tell the king about the one true God, to evangelize for the God of heaven. It's interesting, perhaps, that in our moments of greatest stress or danger, it's then that we have the opportunity to bear witness to God, to tell others about who God is and what God has done. And so Daniel said, "None of your professional prognosticators can explain this mystery to you. In fact, as they told you, no human can answer your request. but there is a God in heaven. There's this wonderful moment, this wonderful sort of change. But there is a God in heaven, a revealer of mysteries. And this God knows what hides in darkness and gives illumination in times of deep confusion and fear. This God has told you, King Nebuchadnezzar, what will happen in the future. Now, I'm going to tell you your dream. This is what you dreamed as you lay in bed. And Daniel told him. Daniel said, this mystery was revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone else, but so that you would know the thoughts of your own minds. Again, this isn't about how great Daniel is, and I think Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they're great. They're fantastic. They're wonderful, but this isn't about that. This isn't about how great or wonderful they are. This is about how great the Lord our God is. And Daniel said, as you were looking right before your eyes, a massive statue rose up, and it was huge, and it was shining with dazzling light. It was an awesome sight, and the statue's head was made of pure gold, and its chest and arms were made of silver, and the abdomen and the hips were made of bronze, and it had legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. Daniel continued, you saw this statue until a stone, uncut by human hands, smashed the statue's feet of iron and clay and shattered them. And then all the parts shattered simultaneously, iron and clay and bronze and silver and gold. And they became like chaff left on the threshing floor. And the wind carried them away until there was no trace that remained. But that uncut stone, Daniel said, that smashed the statue became a mighty mountain that covered the entire face of the earth. Now, an uncut stone, it means a stone that hasn't been touched by human hands. That is, it hasn't been created by human hands. There's no human involvement. It's all about what God has done. The stone was quarried by unseen, superhuman hands. And Daniel said, this was your dream. And now I will tell you its meaning. You, King Nebuchadnezzar, you are the King of kings on earth, and the God of heaven has given you kingship and power and might and glory. God has made you ruler over humans and creatures. You are the gold head. But in your place, another kingdom will arise, one inferior to yours, and then a third bronze kingdom will rule over the earth, and then will come a fourth kingdom, mighty like iron, and just like iron shatters and crushes everything, so like an iron that smashes, it will shatter and crush all these others. As for the feet and toes that you saw, which were a mixture of the potter's clay and the iron, that signifies a divided kingdom. But it will possess some of the unyielding strength of iron. So some of the kingdom will be mighty, but some of it will be fragile. Now, traditionally, as we read this story, as we look at the book of Daniel, these different kingdoms predicted are understood to be kind of the four world empires: the Babylonian, the Persian, the Greek, and the Roman. Could be that it was the Median Empire instead of the Greek, depending on when the book of Daniel was actually composed, or maybe the number of four, four empires is just kind of symbolic rather than historical. But Daniel went on. But in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will raise up an everlasting kingdom that will be indestructible. And this is the uncut stone that became the mighty mountain covering the entire earth. Daniel said its rule will never pass to another people. It will shatter other kingdoms. It will put an end to all of those other empires. It will stand firm, just like you saw when the stone, which was cut from the mountain, but not by hands, shattered the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. He said, a great God has revealed to the king what will happen in the future. This dream is certain, its meaning can be trusted. This is what Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar. But why could it be trusted? Why? Well, because as Daniel said in his Thanksgiving prayer earlier, the Lord our God, the creator of heaven and earth, God is the only one who has the power to change the times and the seasons, to dethrone one king only to raise up another. Well, at that moment then, King Nebuchadnezzar, he bowed low and honored Daniel. He bowed. This is an honor-shame culture, and you would bow before people in order to honor them. He bowed low and honored Daniel, and the king ordered that grain and incense offerings be made to Daniel. And the king declared to Daniel, there's no doubt your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, because you were able to reveal this mystery to me. And then the king exalted Daniel and lavished gifts upon him and made him the ruler over all the province of Babylon and the chief minister over all of Babylon's sages. Now, Daniel actually had a request that instead of that, Daniel's urging then, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be the ones who administer the province of Babylon. But still, Daniel remained in the king's court. He still served in the royal court. Now, it's quite a story that we have here in Daniel, right? I mean, first you have these faithful Jews, loyal to God, but also serving the heathen king. And they were conquered. This was this terrible sort of conquering, and they were exiled, the Babylonian exile, yet they served loyally in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. As I said last week, I just mentioned this, we'll keep saying this, the prophet Jeremiah actually had written a letter to God's people who were living in exile in Babylon. And he instructed them in this letter to seek the welfare of the city where they are, to build houses and to plant, to build up and to plant and to seek the welfare of the city and the people so that they might live in peace as well. And then Jesus, he took this a step further when Jesus instructs his followers to love our enemies. Love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. So with Jeremiah and with Jesus, we hear this, seek the welfare of the city where you are. Seek the welfare of the people where you are and love your enemies. Pray for these people who persecute you. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, who killed many and exiled a substantial portion of the population, I think he had become pretty much Israel's quintessential enemy. And that same Nebuchadnezzar then came to confess Israel's God as the supreme God, the one true, the only God, sovereign of all the earth, the authentic source of wisdom and insight. This is really an incredible thing. And that happened because Daniel took the opportunity to bear witness to God. Daniel was faithful and loyal to God and took the opportunity to bear witness to God, to tell the king about the one true God, to evangelize for this God of heaven. Now, on the one hand, this is a story about the deliverance of God's people in a time of trial. That's right. But it also shows this sort of absurd hope. It's absurd yet persistent, a persistent hope that evil human leaders, by the power of God, can be redeemed. Think about that for a moment. Yep, God delivers God's people, but there's also this absurd yet persistent hope that evil world leaders can be redeemed. So we have a radical hope that God has made and is making and will make all things new, and that includes all people and everything that's created. But I mean, if Israel's prototypical enemy, the destroyer of God's temple, could come to faith. If the king's sages could be saved, all because of the insight that's given to a courageous and faithful Jew. If all of that could happen, then what other twists and turns might history take? What other surprising events and people might surface? No matter how dark the night, how frightening the circumstances, no matter how powerful and wicked the enemy, God's people, and that's us, we are grafted into God's people, us, we can dare to hope for salvation, for our salvation and for the salvation of all other people, the salvation of the entire creation, including the conversion of those who oppose God, because God is always ready and willing and able to redeem and to make new. In the end, there's only one empire that remains. There's only one empire that lasts. God's kingdom is that uncut stone, not made in any way by human hands. It becomes a mighty mountain covering the entire earth. No other kingdom can stand against it. God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, in contrast to the kingdoms of the world, which are transient. There is no Babylonian Empire any longer. There is no Persian Empire. There is no Greek Empire. There is no Roman Empire. And one day, there will be no empire any longer that we now call the United States of America. We live here, and we are certainly called to seek the welfare of this place where we live, to build and to plant, right? To do good. But God's kingdom, the uncut stone, the mighty mountain covering the earth, will make all things new. And with our faithfulness and our loyalty and our allegiance to the Lord our God, we are citizens of that empire. Thanks be to God.